my friends. Today I'm impressed to talk to you about our uphill journeys in life, which was something that was experienced on a regular basis by the Israelites and was talked about a lot in Scripture, especially with a whole section of the Psalms known as the Psalms of Ascents, Ascents, Ascents. So sometimes we feel like maybe many of us feel right now that we're on an uphill struggle to get back to where we want to be. Someplace that we know we want to return to, someplace that we know we want to head for, and it's so long and so arduous and such a difficult journey and feels like a long way off. How do we make it through where we're going now to that uphill goal place that we want to get to? And what do we do on the way there? So it's interesting that God has provided this for us today, as he did back then, ways to think about that journey that'll help give us strength to keep moving onward and help us to persevere through those difficult days of the journey. And there were many, many difficult times that those who were traveling through this period of ascents would have experienced. Now, to explain what the Psalm of Ascents would have been, there were several of them. There was a whole book of them in part of the Psalms. And the reason they called them the Psalms of Ascents was because Jerusalem was on a hill, still on a hill. And they would ascend when they went to Jerusalem for worship, for returning for a festival, or simply in the exile when they were coming back, looking at Jerusalem. Some of those psalms were created for that moment as well and resung as people went back for Passover or any of the psalm of the Feast of the Tabernacles. So people would go from wherever they'd been living, because the exile dispersed all the Jews into different places, and they had to travel to get back to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. And this was an arid place, and some of the places were very difficult to travel through, and the journey may have been extremely long. They may have been thirsty, they may have been hungry, and the other pieces of that, depending on when they were traveling and which roads they were traveling on, during certain points of history, those roads would have been very dangerous because of enemies attacking or bandits laying along the sides of the road waiting to just ambush any travelers that were traveling down that road and were not aware of the bandits or were not in a large enough group to protect themselves from those who would take advantage of those traveling. And we feel that too as we are traveling through this difficult place in our lives, that the enemy is oppressing us with many different things, and depression and anxiety and stress can come against us in times that are already difficult. And we're trying to get through this place and get to where we want to go so we can rejoice once again and be in a place of peace and be in the presence where we feel God's presence with us. Now, he's with us now, but sometimes in our suffering we don't feel him as strongly. So let's start with Psalm 120. We know right away when these Psalms of Ascents are starting that the people are suffering, because Psalm 120 verse 1 says, "I call on the Lord in my distress, and he answers me." That's the good news. We may not get completely out of our distress the moment we call on him, but we know that he hears us. And he's talking about, the psalmist here is talking about all these people who have ambushed him and lied against him and are coming against him. So that's a difficult time for whatever that person was experiencing as they were on their way to try to get back to a place of peace and worship. And the next psalm, Psalm 121, also says, "I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from?" We're looking, when we're in this valley, this dark place that's treacherous, where we could easily be attacked. Where does my help come from? Verse 2 tells us, "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. Now that was really important back then, because if you broke your ankle or twisted your ankle traveling on those treacherous rocky paths in ancient Israel, that was a long way to go to get any medical attention. And we can experience that here if we're already in a place where things are difficult and we have one more thing that happens. That could be just that last thing that we can't survive. So this tells us that God will help watch over us so that we're not going to go through more than he can help us get through to get to the other side of it. He who watches over you will not slumber. So even in those times of the night when we think we can't sleep because we're worried about what's happening, we can know that God doesn't sleep as he watches over us in those times when we're in the dark valleys, on the roadsides, on that treacherous path to get from where we are to where we want to be. And that was what they experienced. I mean, they didn't know for sure that the bandits wouldn't attack them while they slept. So they would sing these psalms over one another and say, he who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel, people of God, us, will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade, which was extremely important in those arid regions when the sun was beating down on them as they were trying to travel and make their water last. The Lord is your shade. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forever. So when we're in these places, these psalms, when you sing them over one another and over yourselves, you're in a serendipity moment with ancient Israel, with all the people of God over all these years who were struggling on their way to find their way back to a place of rejoicing and worship. And this is what they're looking toward in Psalm 122, the very next one. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. And they're looking as they're ascending to going back up to the house of the Lord, to the place of worship. So keeping our eyes on the fact that God is getting us to someplace, not just through someplace, but he's getting us to somewhere where we can rejoice and have peace again. He's got plans for us to have something wonderful. And at the end of Psalm 122, it says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. That's all the people of God that this can refer to as we pray through this and sing this over our families. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security in your citadels. For the sake of my family and friends, I will say, for the sake of all of you, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your prosperity. Can we say that over one another today? May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls, those walls that we're sequestered inside of, and security in your citadels and the fortresses where you're trying to keep yourself safe. For the sake of all of our family and friends, peace be within you, within your homes, for the sake of the house of the Lord. And the next one, I love this one. This is one of my favorites. Psalm 123, another song of ascents, of going through this journey from difficulty to the place where they can have rest and worship. It says, I lift my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. Now, don't think about slavery in this time period the way that slavery was practiced in the United States. It was not exactly like that. It was more people that had gone into great debt, people who were prisoners of war. Those were other kind of ways that people ended up in slavery. Foreign countries that conquered other countries often took them as slaves. So this was a little different. The slaves were entirely dependent upon the master. So that's the important reason why he's comparing our relationship to God. Not like he's a wicked taskmaster enslaving us. That's not what this means. It's talking about how We have no rights to demand anything of the person who owns us, but he's good to us. And it's asked, have mercy upon us, O Lord, have mercy upon us. So our eyes look to God for mercy because no one else can grant it. We are utterly and completely dependent on him. And I love that we can depend on God. And the very next psalm actually came from King David before they were exiled. And it says that God, our help is in the name of the Lord. And if he hadn't helped the people who were traveling back to Jerusalem after battle, they wouldn't have been able to survive the battle. So this was another instance other than going back for worship. And that's why people sang this as a psalm of ascent, because just like King David returning from battle, the people going through those same roadways, going back to Jerusalem for times of worship, would have remembered, well, God was with David when he battled the enemy. And David said, if the Lord had not been our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. The flood would have engulfed us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. Isn't that wonderful that we can pray that over one another? We can encourage one another the way David was encouraged when he returned, and the way that all the travelers who went back to worship God in Jerusalem would have worshiped. Praise be to God. Knowing in advance, they were singing this as they were traveling before they were there. Knowing in advance, praise be to God, our help is in the name of the Lord. And it also goes into the same kinds of thinking. Psalm 125, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. And this would have been a mountain that would have been visible as a pinnacle of strength, of an immovable geological feature that they would have known was strong and that was not going to be shaken by anything. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forever. That's a really great song for today. So we can know that as we go through this, we have God like a whole chain of mountains surrounding us. We're not just in the valley because we're in a dark place. We're also in that protected place where God is watching over us during our journey to be with us. He's not leaving us to go through this all by ourselves. And you can continue to pray through all of these Psalms of Ascents. And it continues on and on and on. Beyond Psalm 120, there's a whole list of Psalms of Ascents that the people would have sung. So let me go over one more Psalm of Ascents. Let me find it. Oh, I love this one. Psalm 131. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. And I want to point out that this was written by King David. So this is the king, one of the mightiest kings that Israel ever knew. And he says, my heart is not proud. I don't concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. It's so important to humble ourselves and recognize we don't need to know everything about all that's going to work out and how this is all going to happen. We need to know that God does. And we don't have to concern ourselves with knowing everything, just knowing God. All we have to do is, like he says in verse 2 of Psalm 131, I have calmed and quieted myself like a weaned child with its mother. Now it's a young child who's not crying because they're hungry, but is still content because they're with their mama. So we're with the Lord holding our heads against his chest, knowing he's got us and that we're not going to go hungry. And we don't have to cry out. We can be content. Israel, in verse 3, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. That is a one we can speak over ourselves and our children. I love the Psalms of Ascents. These are just wonderful for us right now. It asks us to live in unity, and it continues all the way through. And if you need something to carry you through, I encourage you to reread these and speak them over your own life, and put your heart in the hands of the one who carries you on this journey from where you are on a difficult road to a place of rest, rejoicing, and peace, which is exactly where he's taking you. Keep your eyes on that hilltop, on that beautiful, beautiful place where God is bringing you into a more peaceful place of worship so that you can worship on the way. I hope that's a blessing to you and gives you something that you can do right now. Speak it over your homes. Walk through your homes and speak the Psalms of Ascents. Pick out the verses that are meaningful to you and pray them over your loved ones that you can be with and those that are far from you. Because remember, we'll be back with them again, just like the people of ancient Israel were looking forward to gathering with their distant family members once again when they reach the feast. So I pray that that brings blessings to you this week, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.